Hey everybody, welcome back to the second part of 3.2, Solving Rational Equations. So we're going to get into some of these situations where we have to do factoring first. So you can use whatever method of factoring you prefer, but just wanted to remind you that you can go back and look at your boot camp notes if you need to for help with factoring. And you want to make yourself a note of that, let me get that. So if your denominators are not factored first, you want to do that before you do anything else. And the nice thing is you don't need to worry about the numerators right now. You just need to worry about the denominators. Alright, so if I look at number 1, the first fraction is factored. The second one's just a whole number. And then the third fraction is not factored. So that one we need to factor. Alright, so bringing that down, I'm going to have 4 over x minus 1. I'm going to go ahead and turn that into a fraction, 1 over 1. And then when I factor the right-hand side, I'm going to end up with x minus 8 and x minus 1. Alright, and then from here we're just following the same steps as we did in the last video. We need to find our least common denominator, multiply them together. So in this third fraction, we have x minus 8, and then we already have an x minus 1. So we just need to add the x minus 8. So that's going to work out to be x minus 1 times x minus 8. That's our whole common denominator. So that's what we're going to multiply by. And I apologize, our neighbors are doing some construction, so if you hear some obnoxious noises in the background, that's what's going on. Alright, so remember each fraction gets multiplied by our least common denominator, and we're going to cancel out what we can. Alright, so in the first set of fractions, the x minus 1 is going to cancel. In the second set of fractions, there's nothing I can do. And then in the third one, I can actually cancel both. So that's going to leave me with 4 times x minus 8 plus x minus 1 times x minus 8 equals negative 10. Alright, so we need to simplify where we can, so use box method if you need to. Excuse me, if you need to. Go ahead and do FOIL if you want, however, just distributive property, whatever's easier for you. So that first parenthesis is going to give me 4x minus 32. The second one's going to give me x squared minus 9x plus 8. And then that's going to equal negative 10. Since I've got an x squared, that means I've got a quadratic. So I want to go ahead and get everything together on either the left side or the right side. In this case, it's easier to get it all together on the left. Alright, so I'm going to have x squared, and then 4x and negative 9x is going to be negative 5x. Negative 32 and positive 8 is going to be negative 24. And then we're going to need to add 10 to both sides. So we're going to end up with x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0. Alright, so we want to factor that now. Now, you can actually try a couple of different things. Let me back up there. You can factor it, you can do quadratic formula, you can graph and see where they cross the x-axis. Just know that next year for pre-cal, you're going to need to be able to do this in a method that doesn't use a calculator. So factoring or quadratic formula might be faster. So make sure that you're practicing with both. So if I'm factoring this, I'm going to get x minus 7 times x plus 2. Alright, I'm going to test out both answers. Or, I'm sorry, not test out both answers. First I have to solve for both answers. So I'm going to add 7 to both sides. And then I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. Now I want to go back and check my denominators and make sure that none of those make the denominator equal 0. And if I plug those in, I'm good. So this one has 2 answers. It has x equals 7 and x equals negative 2. Alright, so for number 2, it's kind of the same setup. We have one fraction that's already factored, plus 1, and then we have a denominator that's not been factored, so we need to deal with that. So first fraction is fine. Oops. So we have 3 over x minus 7, plus, I'm going to go ahead and make it a fraction, 1 over 1. And then for this one, when we factor that, we're going to end up with x minus 7 and x minus 2. When we find our least common denominator, we're going to end up with x minus 7 times x minus 2. And so that's what we need to multiply by. So we have 3 over x minus 7 times x minus 7 times x minus 2. 1 over 1 times x minus 7 times x minus 2. And then over, or time, equals 8 over x minus 7 times x minus 2. And multiply top and bottom. Okay, canceling stuff out. First fraction, we can get rid of x minus 7. Second fraction, there's nothing we can get rid of. Third fraction, we can get rid of both. Alright, so we end up with 3 times x minus 2 plus 1 times x minus 7 times x minus 2. And then equals 8. Alright, so we've got to go through and simplify that, so I'm going to distribute. And it's going to give me 3x minus 6. Over here, we already know what this equals. I mean, we factored it from up at the top, but if you want to go through and do your box and X puzzle, you can. Or not box and X puzzle, just box. And there we go. Following same format as the last problem. We've got a quadratic, so we know we need to get everything together on one side. So x squared minus 6x plus 8 equals 8. I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides, and that ends up making our life a lot easier because now we can just factor using 2CF. So they both have an x in common. Alright, so we're going to have x equals 0 and x minus 6 equals 0. There's nothing I can do with x equals 0. We're good there. This one I'm going to add 6 to both sides. And then I need to stop and check. Do either of those make my denominator equal 0? Nope, we're good. So again, 2 answers. And remember, we're checking because sometimes when we're dealing with quadratics, you will get only one answer, or you can sometimes get no answer if both of them will make the denominator equal 0. So you've got to go through and check. Alright, last one for today. We've got, looking at this, let's see, we've got the first fraction is factored. Second fraction is not. Third fraction is. So the only thing we have to factor is that second fraction. Alright, so we have 6 over x minus 3. That's second fraction, that's difference of 2 squares. So it'll be x plus 3 and x minus 3. And then minus 4x over x plus 3. Alright, so those are the things we're looking for. So our least common denominator is going to have to be x plus 3 times x minus 3. We need both of those pieces. Alright, so coming over here, we're going to multiply everything by our least common denominator. Alright, so cancel out what we can. So the x minus 3's are going to go. The x plus 3 and x minus 3's in the second one. And then the last one, the x plus 3's. If you're starting to see that pattern and you feel comfortable skipping some steps, you are welcome to do that. Okay, so here's where we are. We have some distributing to do, and we do see a quadratic, so we are probably going to have to factor or quadratic formula, but we'll see. Alright, so first off, this is going to be 6x plus 18. Over here, that 8x squared is just going to hang out. And then distributing, one thing I want you to remember, we're distributing negative 4x, so that negative has to go with it. So we're going to have negative 4x squared plus 12x. Alright, so I'm going to bring these over. And then I also need to combine those. So 8x squared minus 4x squared is going to be 4x squared. 12x minus 6x is 6x. And then minus 18. Okay, so we do need to factor this one. First thing I would do is take out a GCF because 2 goes into all of those. Now, looking at what's inside the parentheses, that's not something we can factor in our heads. So I'm going to go to box and X puzzle over here on the side. Alright, so the first term goes in the top left. The last term goes in the bottom right. Multiply those two together, and that goes across the top. And the middle term goes on the bottom. So we want to find some things that will multiply to be negative 18, but add up to be positive 3. So that's going to be 6x and negative 3x. So I'm going to fill those in over here. Remember, order doesn't matter. Plug them in whichever spot in the box you feel comfortable with. And then we're going to do GCFs. So for that first row, the way I've written it, I'm going to factor out a 2x. And then if that's 2x, that means this has to be x to get 2x squared. If that's 2x, and I need this to be 6x, that means this has to be 3. And then, switching gears and looking at the bottom row, the top is x, and I need it to be negative 3x. That means this needs to be negative 3. And your last step is to look over here and check. Yep, that works. Negative 3 times 3 gives me negative 9. Alright, so we can jump back over here to our problem, and we have 2 times 2x minus 3 times x plus 3. Alright, so I'm going to set all three of those equal to 0. Alright, that one, don't worry about, can't solve it. For this one, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And then I'm going to divide by 2. And I'm going to have x equals 3 halves. Believe it or not, it is actually easier to leave that as a fraction instead of trying to write it as a decimal. I know some of you are allergic to fractions, but just, roll with me for right now. Alright, for this one, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. X is going to be negative 3. Alright, so this was a big, long problem, but remember, we do have to go back and check for our denominator. So I'm going to scroll back up for a second. So that was our original problem is right here, and we're looking at the denominators. So if I put 3 halves in the denominator for x, I'm fine, that doesn't do anything. We won't get 0. But if I put negative 3 in the denominator, if I put negative 3 right there, negative 3 plus 3 is going to give me 0. So we can't use negative 3 as one of our answers. So our only answer is the 3 halves. Alright, so I'm going to put up some practice problems that go with this, along with an answer key. So go ahead and take a look at those. If you're watching this over the summer, look in the comments for the link to the Google Drive folder. And it has the notes as well as practice problems for you. Hope you're having a good day.